Beyond the Mic with Sean Dillon.
We're joined on the Starline by director, producer, writer, author, and most importantly, new dad. You've seen his work in Highway, Billionaire Boys Club, Wonderland, among other projects. He now moves from film to paper with his debut novel, Grand Theft AI. We welcome James Cox.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on, Sean. I appreciate it. I'm honored to be on Beyond the Mic.
James, let's go beyond the mic. Grand Theft AI began after AI AlphaGo beat a grandmaster in the game Go. Why was this project of writing Grand Theft AI as a book instead of as a screenplay important for you?
It just evolved. The thing gripped me. You know, I'd come off Billionaire Boys Club, and it had been a heck of an experience. It was a tough shoot. It had been a long, backing up a little bit, I'd had a young, fortunate break in this business, and coming out of film school with a red hot short. My first 3 meetings in town was Ridley Scott, Jerry Bruckheimer, and Mike DeLuca, and all 3 of them put me in business on day one. So I was off to the races. I couldn't even graduate from NYU because I was already on set directing a $14 million studio picture. It was just crazy. And that movie was called Highway. It was starring Jared Leto and Jake Gyllenhaal. I came off that picture, and it was really a trial by fire because whenever you're a first-time director, you're the least qualified person on the set necessarily. And in fact, it was like I was on a tech scout where it kind of dawned on me when you take all the department heads around and you're like, wow, I'm the guy that doesn't know what he's doing. And then you have that moment, and then suddenly you do realize you know what you're doing. You just don't have any experience moving the machine around. And then eventually you figure out how to do that. So I came off that, and I knew I wanted to write my next movie. I read Training Day, and that kind of changed my life. And a movie called Wonderland came my way. And that was really an incredible experience. The movie was Haunted. It's a true crime about a quadruple homicide that went down in the summer of '81. Val Kilmer plays the porn star John Holmes, which is loosely based, which is the backbone to Boogie Nights. So Wonderland is really about the crime at the end of Boogie Nights, the true crime that went down.
Wow.
And Val was possessed. It was just we shot on the scene of the crime. The set was haunted. If you've seen his Doc Holliday or as Jim Morrison, he's a shaman. There were things he was doing like in the monitor I remember Bob Chin, and he's the Burt Reynolds character in Boogie Nights. So Bob's a real guy. He directed a bunch of John's porn movies. And I remember Val had this line where he's like, we just hit double zeros. We got to get out of it. We just hit double zeros. We got to pull away from the roulette table and get out of the casino before they get, And he had this 00 line, and Bob Chin just turned white, and he goes, how did you know John's bet was double zeros? And I kind of looked at him, and I was like, well, it's the only bet on the roulette table where if you win, everyone else loses. But there was just a lot of stuff that Val did that was just really incredible. It was just a masterclass experience. And that movie really went the distance. We screened it at Toronto. We took it up to the winery and screened it at Francis Ford Coppola's private screening room. It was just a rocket ship. I think I really had no idea just how fortunate I was, because it was right around then that my demons got the better of me. I was someone who always loved going out, loved partying in New York City because that city never sleeps. But I just was incapable of drawing the line between work hard and play hard. It was just all one big juggernaut of energy. And so, when my dad passed away, I just buckled. I was already kind of cruising for a bruising, so I just started making some really bad decisions. Basically kind of gave the middle finger to the entire world and, offended super talented people, embarrassed myself in really high profile situations, blew huge opportunity after huge opportunity, showing up to critical professional moments unprepared. Basically because I just didn't give a damn. And my life got really, really small. And I kind of go into all of this because this was really the heart of what I drew off of when Grand Theft AI, when that project started to kind of stir in my bones. It was on the set of Billionaire Boys Club. I had, like I said, I kind of had gone into a place that was dark and small. And, one day after a long, long time, I woke up. It was Thanksgiving 2013. I was in the lobby of the Hyatt on Union Square in San Francisco, and all the hairs went up in the back of my neck and everything changed. And I was done running. I was done numbing, and I got back to Los Angeles, and I got to work facing up to who I'd become and finding the real me, and not the dark dude from New York City, but the kid from Northern California that was making movies in his backyard when he was 10 years old. Was that passion still there?
How has your greatest defeat helped spur you to today?
Well, when I was on the set of Billionaire Boys Club, which is a picture that came together soon after kind of me finding my true voice, doing a lot of writing, deep in the well, personal stuff in addition to creative. And I really struggled with that picture. It was a tough movie to get made in terms of, arduous logistics and a really like a labyrinth of a true crime. But really it was like the main character that was vexing to get right, because that project dated back to my darkest days and my death wish fascination with condemned souls. And I remember there was someone on set that is still in my life, and she picked up on the fact that every time I was referring to a scene or a character or a moment, it was always, when like you're in the trash compactor and you're in the dark, or like a moment on Neo's arc out of the Matrix, or, I love you, I know, picking up on Han and Leia, Ripley and Hicks, like she just was like, everything you refer to is sci-fi. And then Billionaire Boys Club cratered, and it cratered like right on the half yard line. Like we were right there on the end zone with like a kind of a bidding war simmering, and the whole thing imploded. And I was pissed. You could bet I was in a therapist's office, that week. There were 3 of them. Just going like, what happened, right? Because so many people worked so hard on that picture. And I have to say it was really thanks to my fiance, who really was able to help me put things in perspective and see it at that point through my crew's eyes. She's a talented architect, a RISD graduate, but she's an Academy Award-winning set designer, and she's a member of the crew. And it takes a village to raise a child. And I kind of stepped out of me and was able to see, how not just years of my life, but a year from hundreds of crew members. We worked through holidays, missing precious time with our families, and for what? For like a 4-walled release on 10 screens to satisfy foreign, like pissed. And I just knew I was done with true crime, right? And there was something that had been simmering in me that took a lot of everything I've just described, which is the heights, the trough, and looking into the abyss, and learning to trust people, yourself, the world, hope, and there was just something that really came in and I had this world in my head that, growing up in Silicon Valley, whether it be Blade Runner or Snow Crash or Neuromancer or The Matrix. Cyberpunk is just something that's like I grew up with, loving.
This book is a love story at its base with a damaged pair of couple souls trying to survive. What makes Baz and Ria's story the one that needs to exist in this damaged world right now?
You mean the one we currently live in?
Both.
I can only speak to it on a personal level. That I identified with the idea that nobody but yourself can lift yourself out of the darkness. That being said, that with a little help from my friends, like change is always catalyzed by the environment around you, and rarely is it the sidewalk or the tree across the street. It's usually someone in your life, either actively or indirectly, is having an impact upon you that catalyzes a change. And on the most beautiful level, occasionally that kind of happens on a romantic capacity. And I'm a hopeless romantic, accent on the hopeless. So I just imagine these two characters that really, they were so close to being able to get out of these jail cells of their own construction. They just were fumbling in the dark a little bit and needed a little bit of help finding that key. They were going to have to open it themselves, but just a little bit of like, here, there.
James, are you still in a jail cell of your own construction?
I'm reminded of that quote in Pulp Fiction. I'm trying to be the shepherd. I'm trying real hard. Certainly not the one that I used to be locked into. So you continue to open doors, I think, and integrate and emerge. So the answer on the short version is no. Longer version, kinda.
Future version?
Yeah, I just think we continue to evolve. But that's a really good question.
James Cox, author of Grand Theft AI, joins us beyond the mic, and it's time for the Rocky Nate. 8 random questions. Answer with the first thing that comes to your mind. There is no pressure. Best place at UC Berkeley?
Strawberry Creek.
Why?
Depends on, well, certainly, when the sun's in the right spot. It's kind of enchanted. There's certainly a number of areas of Cal, but that's the first one comes to mind. And Strawberry Creek runs, Berkeley sits on a hill. So it runs, there's a couple of different places. And, I'm thinking about like when you're coming across, you emerge, you come up the hill and you're right at the Campanile. And I can't recall what exactly that crossing, that little fairy tale bridge is. But yeah, if you know, so what you would do is you would sit there and you would stand at the Campanile and you would walk due, what is that? I think that's due south towards Strawberry Creek, and you would bear left, which is a little bit up the hill, and it would take you down that path and that little footbridge. It's just the blessed place. Yeah, it's blessed. It's magical. I took a Shakespeare class from the guy who wrote the book, Stephen Greenblatt. And I think he was on loan from Harvard or something like that. And I remember his Yorick. Just incredible.
The first lyric that you wrote at Atlantic Records that touches or means the most to you today?
Back home, they all say, I don't understand why he's living life that way. Out here, we're all alone. I ain't never gonna find that easy way back home.
Best thing about your daughter?
Oh man, it's so cliche, but she's a riot girl. Her smiling defiant. Especially when she's got half of lunch all over her face.
And what's the one thing you can't wait to share with her?
You know, I wonder which story it would be. You know, I mean, certainly reading stories together. You know, maybe Treasure Island.
Nothing better than a good book. The last 49ers game you went with your dad was against who, and did they win?
You know, I think I've been to a number since, but I think the one that with my dad, it might have been one since, but the one that sticks out is the 15-1 season where we went and won the Super Bowl in my hometown, which was down the road from San Francisco at Stanford Stadium. At 15-1 season, we saw the one against the Steelers, and either we missed the game-winning field goal or they kicked the game-winning field goal. But whatever it was on a field goal. And I think I cried. We were in this old Volvo of his, and I cried the whole. I think I was like 9 or something like that.
Which film festival is underrated?
Hamptons.
Why?
Because it is, or at least it was, you know, so I can't speak today, but it was a feeder that kind of, especially in the short format, that kind of fed into, it was one of the early ones of the season. I think it came right before Toronto and after the New York Film Festival.
Opening that first box of books, how did holding that first hardback, like the ones behind you, what emotions did you experience?
God, emotions. The respect, I think, for the craftsmanship, the paper, the cover, the maps. And I think I do this. It's, you know, I think when we took this off, I don't know if you can tell, but it's like, it's iridescent.
Mm-hmm.
So the level of detail that Blackstone put into this was just astonishing. And yeah, it just the weight. So it was like real respect.
What's the one thing your fiance always depends on you for?
Because she can count on one thing, which is I'm going to forget something. Walking the dogs.
What's the movie that people would be most surprised that you love?
That's a good question. What's one of those ones that's just, I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, I saw Jerry Maguire 3 times in the theater.
Really?
I'm not sure if that's surprising or not, but yeah, that was, I can quote that movie chapter and verse. I think, and the story to that of how Cameron Crowe, I don't know if this is true or not, but the way he was, I think he was like in a loft office at Gracie Films for like 2 years with James L. Brooks, kind of, for lack of a better word, writing the rewrite, you know? It's so good. Is that surprising? I mean, I guess it's with the football element. You want me to dance?
That's very surprising you didn't pick a classic.
Oh, well, I think that would be, you know, Bridge on the River Kwai, of course. You know, like, I think that, like, but a romantic comedy, it is about football, and obviously I'm a diehard Niners fan, so maybe that's why. But yeah, I feel like Clarence Thomas. No, don't feel it. I do.
James Cox, author of Grand Theft AI, joins us beyond the mic. And James, it's time for the back half. Your character Otto says in the book, quote, because we become what we hate, unquote. How has AI helped and hurt creatives today?
I don't really think I don't know if it's impact. You know, I think because I think it's a specter and it's a fear currently. I don't know really how much it's being implemented into real creative stuff. You know, it's just a supporting player. It's probably going to be like that, if not forever, for a very long time. And I was thinking about it. It was funny today because I just was thinking about this, and it's like at the end of the day, currently, and it's going to be like this for a while, like AI is just an aggregate of a ton of essentially research, right? It's just basically, and we necessarily, the intersection of art and commerce being kind of entertainment, you demand with your money, the scarcest supply. So anything that I can go and do with an AI is necessarily something anyone can do with an AI. And it's just not going to be scarce. What's going to be scarce is something that like nobody but this person can do. So you could make the argument that like it's a supporting player, but I just don't think. I think if anything, the impact has been felt in like how scared everyone is of it.
Don Winslow shocked you and fully endorsed your book, telling you to, quote, stick to your guns, James, stick to your guns, unquote. What's your message to creatives who have an idea but are struggling to get it on paper, film, whatever?
Roll the heat. You've just got to, whatever the heck it is that's compelling you to struggle, put that down. Get that out. It's like that line in Wonder Boys. What are you going to tell a writer that he doesn't already know? Except keep writing. And so just keep writing and be respectful of the structure, the forms, in whatever medium you may be operating in.
When you started reading from your book at the Village Well, how hard was it, and how hard was your chest pounding?
It was fun. It was fun. It was, it's my writing, and all the attention was on me, so it was my favorite subject matter. That's like a joke, but honestly, yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it was a room filled with some of my oldest friends and family, so it was a very receptive room, and it's the passage that I chose is one of my favorite parts, if not my favorite parts. The part, when she goes, side by side with the twin sister she loved. I remember when I wrote that, I was like, domino mother, I was like, there it is.
Boom!
So like that, yeah, when it happened for me, that's like, again, like when you come back to people that are struggling with it, it's like, do you want to write or do you want to be a writer? Like, do you want to like write something that ends up being a book, or do you want to hold a book in your hands and say, I did this? Because the second one is irrelevant. This just ended, like when you're like, what did you feel like when you looked at this? I was like, oh man, they did a great job with it. I wasn't like, yes, I wrote a book. And that's just because like, now when we get into the writing and I can read you different pieces, I'm like, there we go. That's it. Like right there.
Who would you cast if you could for the movie version of Grand Theft AI, and will you direct it?
I'm not even answering any of that.
Why?
You know what I mean?
It's okay.
A young Lenny Kravitz as Baz. Ariana Arjona as, like Ana de Armas, the Ria characters, you kind of have like, there's just that fierce, defiant, she's half Italian, half Cuban.
As you move from behind the camera to behind the table at book fairs, Comic-Cons, and libraries, what's the biggest lesson you've had to learn?
Well, the number one thing with books is that right here, that's my name, right? So it's not like there's 3 names that aren't me at the top. And maybe it's like, if I'm a huge dude, it says a James Cox. Usually it's just down in this group. But it's just me. And that changes a lot of different things. It changes the notes process, right? It changes like what you do, what you have to and don't have to do. Then when you're releasing the book, the author is like critical to promoting this thing, and you're shaking hands with, you're not like at some premiere separated by this red carpet and this and that, and it's a publicist, and it's none of that. It's like, and the numbers of like what makes a successful book versus what makes a successful opening weekend, it's like orders of magnitude and different. So like, man, every time someone reads this thing and reviews this thing and goes on Goodreads or goes on Amazon or shakes my hand at a book fair or I sign, it's like it's like this lifeblood thing that you don't get that in the movies. The closest you get to is a test screening, and they're like, it's just so different and brutal and awful. Like it's amazing to be that close to it, and really, people like, I mean, it's like 370 some odd, 360 pages. It's like, it's just such an honor. Like, I think you read some of this book, if not the whole thing. And you can be honest. Did you read the whole thing?
I read the whole thing.
I mean, that's like, thank you. Like, that's just like a huge ask and a big responsibility on my part to be like, I'm not asking for like hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours of your time. It's like asking for you to like read.
If the story is worth it, it's easier for the reader. Quote, AIs all want justice. They'll fight until the day they're deactivated in a war against the elites, unquote. So, what's justice to you?
What's justice to me? Well, I mean, if justice isn't something that's an ideal, then you're starting to get into some real trouble. In a practical level, then it's like a jury of your peers, et cetera, and there's like the law of the land. Justice in a theoretical situation is, I don't know. I mean, you want me to define that? Like there's scales, and I
in the world that you write, what's justice?
In my world, like the one I inhabit, or in the world that I write?
Yep.
Well, I mean, so that's an interesting question, because I'm a debut author. So I've just embarked upon this journey. I've been making movies for almost 3 decades, and I've made movies about really despicable people, and I've made movies sometimes about likable people. But, and so it's funny because a movie-going audience member, especially like when you start to look at a large, broad section of them, really understands justice deep in their core, and they're going to the movies to experience a world that is just. And the person who is delivering that justice is them. And if you don't balance those scales, and whether it be Indiana Jones or Jesus Christ or Henry Hill, right? You gotta be really careful, like with a Henry Hill, or Passion of Christ or whatever. Like, these things are like really critical to a movie's how movies are received, and then as the filmmaker, your livelihood. So, and I learned that like kind of the hard way, right? Because John Holmes is really like, I mean, the name of the art, Devil and John Holmes, like the devil be done with him, condemned souls, that sort of thing. So maybe it's kind of like, you don't, it's like that classic Brandeis quote about pornography. I know it when I see it. So injustice, That's easy to spot, right? Justice is a lack of injustice. Justice is the enforcement against the unjust.
How did Robert Towne influence you, and how did he change the way you see yourself as a filmmaker?
Robert Towne he influenced me primarily through writing a movie called Chinatown. So Chinatown is a really important movie to me. Me falling in love with cinema and really like cinematography, because a long time ago I was a cinematographer, and then I was a director, and then I was a screenwriter, and now I'm an author. So that was the number one influence, is just how much I adore that movie. You want to talk about justice, right? Politicians, buildings, and whores all grow respectable with age.
Forget about it, Jake. It's Chinatown.
Fully. And she's like, there's a flaw on the inside of your eye. And then what happens to her? I mean, it's brilliant the way he's able to be just so very conscious of a feather on one side of the scale and a feather on the other and whatnot. And then I just was remarkably honored to have, he read the script Wonderland, and Val had a relationship with him, and so he read the script when Val was on board, and we went up to his house, and it was a dream come true, because he was such an important writer to me, Mr. Gitz. And he loved the script, and he had just one very singular note, and he pitched the scene where Eddie and John meet on the boat, and he calls him brother, right? And Paris Hilton's in that scene, and we shot that on this boat, and it was something very small, but what it commenced this relationship that began in love. And so that itty bitty thing in which they were once brothers, right? And they hugged and they had that connection, meant that what he was doing to Eddie was a betrayal. And that created a betrayal. And so what he then showed, and he's like, if you add that one scene, you create this cycle of betrayals in which, and he went through it, I'm going to screw it up, but he's like, he betrayed Sharon to be with Dawn. He betrayed Dawn to sell him to Eddie, and he betrayed Eddie when he sold Eddie to the Wonderland gang. And he just had that one scene, and it created this link that went all the way across. He's like, if you just add that one scene, you'll have these cycle of betrayals. And me and Mauser were like,
wow.
Crosshairs came down. He's like, there, like laser. And then it was like, thank you very much. And we walked out, and he made the script better. And it was like, that was all it was just an additive little note.
James Cox, author of Grand Theft AI, joined us beyond the mic. Quote, you and I both know the reality to an AI's true nature, unquote. What do you see in the future of AI, and what worries you about the future that might be like your book, or maybe even worse?
I'm really interested in the interface in terms of the near future. So, and I'm surprised at how difficult it is to communicate with your phone right now. There was a thing called Humane. They had a little AI pin, and that thing just fizzled. So that kind of is interesting to me. And that, in the book, it's the wet wire. It's kind of like a brain-computer interface.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of what would scare me, like, it's not necessarily the AI. They kind of say that thing like, you're not going to get replaced by an AI. You're going to get replaced by someone who uses AI. I definitely, I think if anything you want to be afraid of, it's who owns the AIs. And, like I said at one, I think it was in Chicago at C2E2, I think that it's the most powerful invention since the hydrogen bomb. And that was like nation states, who own the hydrogen bomb. Like, you and I own the hydrogen bomb. We didn't know much about it because it was classified, but technically it was like the taxpayers, the government, the elected officials, right? And there were two superpowers, et cetera, but no private interest, no company owned a hydrogen bomb, and they don't And that's not the way it is now. Now it's just owned by private interests in terms of AI. And so that I think is going to be a big thing.
So private interest control scares you about the future.
Yeah, if you want to use the word scare. I'm kind of that guy that's like, I believe in the long arc of history that bends towards justice sort of thing. And I don't get too riled up about what's going, like people can think, oh my God, it's so, the times right now, they're so polarized, they're so blah, 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 all this stuff. And I'm like, nah, we're just seeing a lot more of it.
How has the evolution from screenwriter, director to writer changed you and the way you see cinema and books as a whole?
I mean, not that much, to be honest, which is kind of surprising. But I've just kind of started this journey, and I'm not sure exactly what the trajectory is. The second book's written, so that was really daunting.
So what's coming up in the sequel?
Our misfits, our surrogate family of misfits, they major obstacles are in the future. They like road. What would you call it? Potholes ahead. But I'll say this: that was really the most challenging thing that I've done to date.
Why?
Because this book was shepherded through a long journey of people who read it and encouraged me and gave notes. I mean, like I said, and I've said this before, it really was like a vomit at first of like a lot of prose in these weird short story character bios that were kind of building the world to support a screenplay that was going to be my next movie. And then that evolved, and eventually it kept growing. And there was always people going this way, try this, do that, whatever. And then when the second book, when Blackstone bought this book, they bought the sequel too. And so then I went and did a lot of work with, the traditional publishing editor, the copy editor, learned a ton about CMOS. You're like, what the heck is CMOS? That's the Chicago Manual of Style, right? Like that is how the written word in America sits on the page, if it's grammatically correct. And anything you're doing is either following the rules or breaking the rules. And until you know the rules, you don't know if you're following them or breaking them, right? And like there's that classic thing, like there ain't no rules, just don't break any of them. When the second book came, I started it before the editorial process. The editorial process changed my voice necessarily. Then I had to go back in, and then I had to kind of retool it, learning what I'd learned. But the bottom line was that I was in a cave, like in a vacuum. I had a few people that I could pitch ideas and scenes, but there was nobody reading anything really. At that point, I use a specific system in screenwriting that is based on Frank Daniels' 8-sequence approach, in addition to like Blake Snyder's Save the Cat and Sid Field's. They all kind of, but the real one that's like when you fold Save the Cat or the 10-20-10 model into the 8-sequence approach and your pinch points, you start to really understand how things should evolve across 110 pages of a screenplay. What was crazy was I came across this novel writing blog that used the pinch points that are basically breaking Act 2A and Act 2B into quarters. And that opened everything. And I was like, my God, like you're going to write a novel and there's somebody out there that's organizing story across 80 to 90,000 words in the same way that you would organize a screenplay across 110 pages. Mind you, there's a lot more labor in 90,000 words versus 110 pages. And yet at the end of the day, creatively, you're still wrangling the same animal, same bones. And that was eye-opening.
James, when you're in the world creation stage, what are the most important things for you, those concrete things that you base everything else around.
The Cracker Jack.
Really?
Yeah. So the thing originally was, it was like that. The Cracker Jack, I think Baz was a Cracker Jack, but the whole idea was the idea that you had this, device in your head, like a smartphone or et cetera, whatever, a brain computer interface. And you were prohibited from turning it off. And so there was, what is in the book called a portion of the federal government called universal monitoring. And so the idea that like to go off grid was technically illegal the way drinking was illegal in prohibition. So that it was just so, big brother that everybody was like, and so you had this, yeah, exactly. You kind of had this cottage industry that developed where I think it's like part surgeon, part hacker, all hustler, whatever I can't remember the line is, but that guy. And so then that thing evolved, and it suddenly had to build off of that, where it was like, well, what would create a situation, right, that would have that ubiquitous Uncle Sam? And I was like, well, it would have to be some sort of like 9/11 Red Scare event that creates this really robust surveillance operation.
As you work with Academy Award and Golden Globe winners and nominees, how did you balance egos and the vision you are creating for the audience?
You really need to check your ego at the door. That was a big difference between the movie I did at Highway versus Wonderland. So that was a big learning curve. Some of these people that are so talented, right? Like they have very distinct visions, really strong personalities that you need, because you need the best out of them. And so you're going from a student set, or you're going from a small set where it's all for one for all. And then you're kind of getting into a situation where there's names above the posters. There's different weights to different people. Certain people are carrying a lot of clout and control and political power and whatnot. So the number one thing is that your heart has to be in the right place in terms of the movie. You do have to really have a very insightful, strong understanding of what makes any artist you're working with be their best. What is their best? So that requires a lot of research. You have to be able to look at all the stuff that they've done and be like, why is he fantastic or she fantastic in this place and she's that way in this thing, or he's not so great, or he's faxing it in here? Like, what is going on here? And you start to see that pattern repeat itself in certain movies. And then you have to formulate a theory that you're going into your first meeting with, and there has to be one of the three things that's really important is that they recognize that your heart is in the right place with the movie, that you've done your homework with them, and that you can speak to their toolbox.
In the same way, how do you balance the egos in your book when their actions are sometimes contradicting their best interest?
You're basically, you're just kind of additive. So it's like you're taking a trajectory of, your lead, your two leads, right? And they're going to have an arc that's interacting with each other, in which you're having, essentially the simple Aristotelian, inciting incident upends the status quo. They go on a journey in which they encounter obstacles, and eventually, as the first guy I ever worked with, you put the cat in the tree and get him down again, and essentially at that point, when at their where everything is effed, inevitably that locks in your story arc, and then you're going to kind of weave in your supporting characters, your interaction with your antagonist. So it's kind of like you create this, you build spines, and you're building this kind of house or structure that evolves across a certain, duration of story, whether it's page count, minutes, whatever that is. And so sometimes one of the hardest things to do is the bad guy. I find that's really the hard thing, is to create that flawed bad guy who is himself arcing. That's for me kind of the most challenging situation and I think they do it the best really in Empire Strikes Back, and really Micro on Darth is a really good example of like, obviously at the end of the day, he has this incredible reversal at the end where he becomes Luke's ally and he's the reason why Luke survives. And it's this incredible turn, coupled with the incredible reveal in the second one, which is in of itself an act 2 to a larger 3-act. It's just those 3 movies are just like Joe Campbell, brilliant. But again, there's one scene where they all break bread together, right? Where the crew breaks bread together. It was one of the last scenes that I wrote. And it was when Blackstone got involved. It was kind of, we started filling in some of the stuff and breathing life. That, I don't think I could have necessarily written that early because there was so much interaction between everyone. And you got to remember, like when you're shooting something, even when there's an 8-top around a table, like Reservoir Dogs at the opening of that's still like, it's a series of dialogues, right? There's 8 people, so there's 16, whatever many you count the infinite number of 2 people interacting with one another. And some of them are like, you're shooting Toby Wan, Toby Fu, Toby Dun, Toby Chan, and there's these things that are back, and he's brilliant with that stuff. It's out of the gate, first scene, first movie, like out of the park. But it's still, when you're working with a cameraman, it's always like a series of shot, reverse shot.
It's time for the impossible question with James Cox be on the mic. Who are the best directors in the 20th and 21st century?
I mean, I can't even limit them.
Why?
Right. So it's like, okay, you have the greats of, you can't even say it's like Scorsese, Spielberg, all the guys that are in the shark in the photo, all the guys that wrote with those dudes. There's that guy, those guys. Then you have James Cameron, who's just out of control. You have the master, David Fincher. So the Safdie brothers jumped into my mind of very recent. That Uncut Gems is just insane. I'm trying to think of like Nolan is this century, right? So like he's just like I'm dropping someone right now that's like phenomenal that's not coming to mind. There's Guillermo del Toro, obviously. Yeah, and I'm not doing justice, but I would say like if you had to say 3 from each century, I don't know. I think I've rattled off even more, and they're all working in both. Should I keep going? Then you have like Roman Polanski is his own animal.
Hitchcock?
Oh God, yeah. And then see, like then you get into like that division of Hitchcock, and I guess that's like everyone before that with like. And I'm going to space here, but like the John Ford, the best thing about the John Ford is that he's at midway. He's at midway out there, like, get that 0, like, and the thing's going, and it's going, and he's like, get that, I think there's a cigar somewhere in my mind. There's like, you have McTiernan. Right, like he goes on that run with what is it? Hunt for Red and Predator and Die Hard. That three pack, which is just insanity. George Roy Hill jumps into mind, and then there's the Howard Hawks and just all those the guys that are in the kind of when the camera weighs as much as a Volkswagen type of thing, and it's all that world. And my favorite, I was quoting him earlier, right? Like Maltese Falcon, Treasure of Sierra Madre, like John Huston, and Bogey is like, come on, so you when you sit there and you're like single it down to 3, you're like,
I told you it was impossible.
Yeah, I would probably say like Cameron, Scorsese, Spielberg, Nolan, Fincher, and because 7 is just barely the last century. Nolan, Fincher, and I don't know if I was saying Safdie, but there's something else that's coming to mind. But yeah, I really liked Uncut Gems.
Okay, let me give you a new impossible question. How do you want to be remembered?
Oh, man. As a good dad.
How do you handle it when one hand you might have a great review, and on the other you have one where it says it sucks?
Well, I mean, everybody's got a different taste, and I'm starting to see it, as I'm reading some of these things. It's not the same as like a movie review, which is like a whole different animal. For a reader to read the book and then take the time to get online to Goodreads or wherever else and write in like something that's like paragraphs and paragraphs. It just is like, it's just incredible. It's not like so much like, it's just so cool to see people see a person connect and understand the story, and follow it and like dial into it and have absorbed it and have finished it, and enjoyed it enough to leave any sort of review on it. It's just awesome, And so for me, the idea that like the journey that I had in my heart, that I feel about this, I care about these characters a lot. I love Baz and Ria. Right? I love Indy and Marion. I love Ripley and Hicks. I love Sam and Diane. I love, Neo and Trinity. I love any of these duos that are in some ways like can't live with you, can't survive without you. That like oil and water chemistry that then finds its way into something that's like so much bigger than they ever imagined before. So I, to see people connect on that level, and then to see people not connect on that level, I don't know. It's that idea that it's gone from something that's in my head, that's on a computer, that's in pages, to like it lived and breathed in someone else's imagination. It's such an honor. It's such an honor. Like it's such a blessing that anyone would read something that I read. I mean, it's like a gift from the universe, right? I mean, and I've said it's not as profound as my daughter's smile, but it's a blessing nonetheless. And I'm incredibly grateful.
What's the one story, James, you want to share with everyone?
There's a story about Val that like, I don't know if I've told this. I think I've told it somewhere, but he was going to come in and play Eddie Nash, and I got him, he got interested in playing John Holmes, and I could tell that part of the story, but whatever. So he's like, okay, I'm interested in John Holmes, whatever. And we're 2 hours into the meeting, and I'm like, you want to go up to the murder house? And he's like, yes, I do. Right. And so we walk out, and I have this car that we've nicknamed the Taco. And I won't even go into that. That's another story, but it has no top on it. So we've cut the top off this like 1988 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, and it's got like fake fur tiger and Val's Val. So he's like, what is this? He's like in love with this thing. And so as we're driving up to get to what you were talking about, we have this great thing. I know that he's excited about this, and doors is a big deal to me, right? So I sit there and I'm like, hey, Mr. Kilmer, you want to come down off that fence and make a movie? Right? Which is Rothschild. You know what I'm talking about. That's Rothschild's line in the parking lot at the Whiskey A Go-Go. Right? So I'm like, hey, Mr. Kilmer. And we're driving. And I think he's just taken me to Rothschild's house, which is on a road up Laurel Canyon that's unpaved, that has no address. There's all these weird houses up there. I didn't even know that we're there. And this house that was Rothschild's house was like built by Harrison Ford when he was still a carpenter. It's like crazy, right? Or part of it was, whatever. And so I'm pinching myself as this happening. So I'm like, hey, Mr. Kilmer, you want to come down off that fence and make a movie? And he looks at me, he's like, sure. And I turn sheet white because that's Jim's line. So he just doesn't even like say anything. He doesn't laugh. He doesn't giggle. He just hits me with Jim's line when he's up on the fence going, sure. So he just goes, sure. And I turn white and he smiles. And he's like, it's right here, Jimmy. It's right here. Yeah, it was insane. There's more. And it just keeps going. He is such an amazing artist. When
was the last time you talked to him?
I saw his, we've traded texts, but I saw him, the last time I saw him is I went and saw his Mark Twain. And this wasn't the actual thing. It was the show I was supposed to go see, his closeout show at the Pasadena Playhouse, that I couldn't because the final mix, the last night of the final mix of Straight A's was that night. So that's one you just can't. And so I had to give the tickets away. And so I was so bummed. And I went and saw it. He was showing it, I think, down at a theater in Long Beach. And that play is the best one-man show I have ever seen. You know, it's because Mark Twain was like a bugler or a drummer in like the Alabama 13th or whatever it was. He was in some sort of Confederate unit as a 13-year-old. Obviously, he was Samuel Clemens, and then he became the riverboat captain, and then he became Mark Twain, and then he became the celebrity who had the pen pal love affair unconsummated with the founder of the Christian Science. I mean, there's 18 lives to Mark Twain, and Val's one-man show is Mark Twain in purgatory, defending his life, all 18 of them, timeless, like unstuck from time. So he's bouncing, and because it's purgatory, he can wear Dixie whites with Yeezy high tops. And it's crazy. So he's bouncing from one, and then he goes into this, and the lights change, and he's just Val. Like, it's like, well, there's Doc Holliday, there's Jim Morrison, there's John Holmes, there's Real Genius, there's Iceman. He's just going boom, 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 boom. You know, crazy. And it was so amazing that I was just able to look him in the eyes, and he and I know each other enough to know that, like, we don't pull punches. And I just was like, that was the best one-man show I have ever seen. And not just performance, the best writing, the best anything. And yeah, so I highly recommend, if you can get your hands on that video or whatever. It is a conglomeration of the last 2 or 3 nights, the closing weekend at Pasadena Playhouse, where it's so good.
The best place at UC Berkeley is at Strawberry Creek. He loves his daughter's smile and thinks the Hamptons is an underrated film festival. His book is Grand Theft AI. James Cox, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
My pleasure.
And that, my friends, is a Beyond the Mic XL. If you're enjoying these conversations, please check out another Beyond the Mic episode to find more actors, artists, and people you need to know. We'd also appreciate a like and subscribe on the Good Pods app.